They're off.
All covered, all ground, all beaten. Franco won the champion stakes and lived up to the title. Driven out after running, Sire Grugy has seized the opportunity this season and he's going to land the biggest prize of all, who lead the Derby field up to the line, and it's Ruler of the World who won the Derby.
A royal win in the Gold Cup. Esteban has done it. Esteban and Ryan Moore have won for Her Majesty the Queen.
It's Mono to win the National.
You're indeed listening to the Picks from the Paddock podcast with, as always, me, Rory Paddock, and regulars Chris Connolly and David Weldon. How are you doing, chaps?
Yeah, sound.
Not too bad.
Now, obviously, it's been an absolute age since we last did a podcast, but rather than go over everything we've missed out on, we'll keep it to things that are recent. Obviously, a lot has happened pretty recently in the horse racing world. We'll start off with, obviously, a bit of sad news in the recent passing of Kauto Star, and, you know, what a fantastic, amazing jumper, and just one of the superstars of jumps racing, national hunt racing we've seen over the last 20 odd years. Come to you, Dave. How highly do you rate those?
To be honest, I was always a Denman fan. That's not taking anything away from Kauto Star. He was a superstar in his own right. Shame to me that we never saw Kauto and Denman both at the peak of their powers in the Cheltenham Gold Cup. But what he did for Paul Nicholls, and just any chaser that can win the Tingle Creek over 2 and then win the Cheltenham Gold Cup twice, and 5 King Georges, 3 Betfair Chase, or whatever it is, 4 Betfair Chases, is an absolute hero, and it's a massive loss to all the connections and to the cheat, and he was just a superstar, really.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people kind of forget that he won, you know, the Tingle Creek, and I think he won it twice, and he won it at the age of 5 and 6 as well, which is pretty special in itself, never mind then going on to be the first ever horse to retain the to win the Gold Cup back after losing it. And, you know, that was just a wonderful, wonderful horse. I think you pretty much said everything, Dave. I mean, definitely the King of Kempton as far as I'm concerned. The King George wins. Where would you rank the horse, Chris?
Yeah, I'm with Dave. I was more of a Denman man personally. You know, I think horses that go from the front tend to have that, you know, that the public sport kind of thing. You know, it's a hero thing going from the front and carrying big weights like he did in the Hennessy. But, you know, Kauto Star was a great horse. You know, he won left, he won right. He won from 2 to 3 3 1/4. So you can't question the horse's greatness. He's certainly one of the better horses of the last 20, 30 years. And it is a terrible loss for racing and racing fans in general.
Now, obviously, we could bang on it all day about how good a horse he was, etc. In terms of the horse's untimely death and what's going on with that, I mean, the official sort of press release was the horse was doing a bit of work, it had fallen, it had an injury, and unfortunately the horse's health deteriorated over what was a weekend and a few days, and then sadly had to be put down. You've obviously read up a lot on it, Chris. You've seen what's been said, etc. We won't get into the connection side of things just yet, but can you shed a bit of light on what's been said more recently, some of the accusations? Because I think Alistair Down was on Channel 4 this Saturday, and he said something that was relatively poignant in the sense that the fact that people are still asking what's going on means that something hasn't been clarified and isn't, you know, whether there is something to hide, no idea, but the fact that it's not everyone singing from the same hymn sheet makes the general public worry and wonder as to, the genuine reasons. I mean, if you've got any sort of light to shed on it, Chris, fire away.
No, I mean, there's been plenty of mudslinging in the press. Personally, I feel extremely sorry for Clive Smith. He was the owner of Kauto Star, and, people remember him, with his scarves and, his days out at Kempton and, parading the horse when he was retired even. But a lot of people have decided to attack Clive Smith and Laura Collett, who was looking after the horse and teaching it dressage. There's been a lot of things said. A lot of people wanted the horse to be retired, and some people saw it as some sort of cruel second career for the horse, which I think is a little bit peculiar. Dressage is it's far from jumping fences, and from what we've heard, it was a tragic accident. But it's been made out of something else has happened, like we don't know. And this probably stems from Paul Nicholls deciding to openly tell everyone in a television interview that he'd not heard about the accident at all. It had been 3 weeks, so he began to throw muck straight away, which I think was unfortunate. And I don't think there's any real need for that. We're not going to know everything about horses when they're retired, and I just think the timing of this all is terrible. And the ones that seem to be affected most, in my opinion, are Clive Smith, the owner, and Laura Collett.
I mean, I'll be honest, and I'll hold my hands up. When I first heard the news, I wasn't open about saying, Clive Smith that, Clive Smith this. But my own personal opinion was, and I'll be honest, it was a naive one, was why is a decision been made to, give the horse a second career, as it were? And I could understand with some horses, but with a horse that owed the owner absolutely nothing, it won over £2 million in prize money, it will go down as one of the best national hunt horses of all time, in my opinion. And again, from a naive onlooker, my initial thought was, well, you selfish, this and that, Clive, what have you gone and done this for? It should be rolling around in the field doing nothing. It helps you now. It doesn't have to train to do anything, etc., etc. And I'll hold my hands up. That was my original opinion. But I think it was chatting to you, Chris, sort of afterwards. And at the end of the day, the three of us would all dream to own, X amount, if not a whole racehorse. And the cost to own and keep, etc., for a racehorse is bloody expensive, If you're pumping money into that, and let's be honest, he's owned more than just one horse. If you're pumping money into the sport and just to the upkeep and the look after of a horse, you've got the right to decide what you do with your property. Because at the end of the day, it is. And if the horse liked it and seemed to enjoy it, then I'm none the wiser.
Yeah, well,
that's my ignorance,
It seems to be a misconception that there's lots of money involved with Kauto Star and dressage. There's nothing like winning Gold Cups and winning King George's. Horses are racehorses in particular. They're highly strung animals. They're not pets. They're not things that are going to... Most of the time they do get injured, they will be rolling around in the field, or, they'll be in their barn or wherever you want, the stable or whatever. So they are highly strung things, and, some people would look at it as being cruel, having a racehorse and just sticking it out, in the big field, for the rest of its years. Some of them want things to do, some of them are still competitive, so, I don't see any real issue or anything that Clive's done wrong in particular. It's not really a second career. It's nowhere near like, actually racing, and it's just something to keep the horse's mind sharp, in my opinion. I have no issue whatsoever with it. Certainly not for no massive financial gain. I think it's just Clive doing one of them things, and, like you've already touched upon, it was his horse. He bought the horse, and it was his decision where he wanted to send the horse. I think Paul Nicholls was probably a little bit stung, because I think he expected it to have a retirement home, at Ditchy, and that's not how it goes. If you own something, it is yours. Paul Nicholls had the great pleasure of training such a great horse, and in my opinion, Clive's decision to send it, to dressage with Laura Collett, I think that should have been respected and left at that.
Dave, your thoughts on the whole situation and what's obviously going on?
Yeah, no, I agree with Chris there. Think about a human who every day is training to run a marathon at the end of the year. and then he retires, he's not going to stop running. He's going to keep running. He might not be competing in marathons, but he's going to just keep running every day. And that's exactly what they're doing with Kauto Star. Keeping him active, keeping him there. Like, he's just, if he's in the field, he's going to be sitting around most of the time, probably in his box. So, like, I don't really have an issue. I think Paul Nicholls probably wanted to keep Kauto Star in Ditchy to keep him there as a tourist attraction. Get people into the yard, have your picture taken with Kauto Star and them beside each other. And that would have been the end of it. And he was looking purely financial gain for Paul Nicholls, in my opinion.
Just, you've touched upon it already, Chris, as well. Bit of mudslinging. You know what? We have to talk about it. We have to kind of get involved with it. I suppose it's out there now. I know that the Racing Post ran Clive Smith's response, etc. And, you know, Nicholls was very open about it. But for those that didn't hear or didn't read or didn't see some of the comments, etc., shall we call them, do you want to elaborate on that, Chris?
Well, you see, Clive Smith never said anything, about Kauto Star's injury, and Nicholls was never informed until 3 weeks after it happened. This was Nicholls who decided to tell us all this. So, it was vindictive in that sort of thing. Nobody knew about this. And, Clive Smith was rather forced to respond. Some terrible things have been said about him and Laura Collett, totally unjustifiable from people who don't know the pair of them, and this is basically starting from, a guy like Paul Nicholls, who is massive in racing, got such a big profile, and most of the racing press love the man. So I think it's a little bit facetious from Paul Nicholls to say what he said. And, Clive Smith was, he was forced to respond. He was backed into a corner, and, the mudslinging began in earnest then because he turned around and said that Clifford, who used to ride the horse at Ditchy, and Paul Nicholls were, free and welcome to see the horse whenever they pleased. He also stated that neither of them ever did. This was in a response from, basically Paul Nicholls saying they'd have loved to have gone and said their last goodbyes to him. So, the mudslinging began, but I think you can point the finger squarely at Paul Nicholls and, the sometimes inbred racing, the propaganda machine that is racing, really. Paul Nicholls is massive, Clive Smith is an owner, and, turning on Clive Smith in that manner and some of the things that have been said, I think have been absolutely disgraceful.
I mean, another thing that's worth pointing out, and I know it's pretty simplistic, but at the end of the day, Paul Nicholls worked for Clive Smith. It's not like Paul Nicholls did him a favour. Clive Smith paid his wage to train the horses he had. And without Clive Smith pumping in some of the money to buy the decent horses that gave Paul Nicholls a success, then it's a pretty big slap in the face as far as I'd see it. So last thing, want to end on a high, obviously, with this great horse. What was his best ever performance, Chris?
I'd say it's Last King George. Tremendous performance. He was not entitled to beat Long Run, and he jumped silly. It was a fantastic performance, and at Kempton, where the horse was best, in my opinion.
Dave?
To me, it was when he finished third in the 2011 Gold Cup, I think it was. It was just really the sight of Kauto Star and Demon both coming down the hill, both pushing along, jumping the last two together before being passed by Long Run, but it just showed what great heroes the two horses were. Battling on like that, given 5 years to Long Run.
For me, best run, gonna be a bit sort of out of left field, and again, touched upon it, it's one that's kind of forgotten about, considering how well the horse went on to be as well. But I want to go with one of its Tingle Creek wins. It beat horse Boy Poor Steadies by 7 lengths and absolutely trounced it. And Boy Poor Steadies then went on to win the Queen Mother the same year. And I think that sort of form reads brilliantly to anyone, But yeah, last word, just an absolute fantastic horse. It's a shame, not just owner, trainer, but critics that are now sort of throwing their hat into the ring, to an extent, including ourselves, that everything that's going on afterwards is unfortunately the talking point and somewhat detracts away from what was an absolutely fantastic animal. Where would you rate it? Last question, lads. Where would you rate it in terms of Gold Cup horses? Top 5 of all time? Top 10? Dave?
In the modern era, he's been the best. And I can't see anything surpassing him in this generation. So I wouldn't go as far as comparing him to Arkle, because I wasn't around for Arkle, so it wouldn't be fair, but he's the best I've seen.
Chris?
Yeah, he's bang up there. I mean, personally, I think he was better at Kempton. I don't think he was totally at home at Cheltenham. I think Denman was better suited to Cheltenham, and I think, Best Mate's a horse we always forget about at Cheltenham, but he was a great horse, and you have to say his consistency stands him out as the best horse of the last, 15, 20 years, no question.
Yeah, I'd pretty much echo that, lads, as well. I'd probably say top 2. So it's a bit of a toss-up between Best Mate in terms of if we're talking Gold Cup horses, but in terms of just chasers, I'd say, yeah, over the longer distance as well. Yeah, the best of the last 20 years.
You're listening to Picks from the Paddock podcast, your dedicated racing podcast.
Moving on to another horse that's hitting the headlines at the moment and still racing on the flat. Obviously, we've not talked about the flat all year for 2015, but Golden Horn has to be the horse of the season so far. Derby winner, now an Eclipse winner. How highly do you rate it, Dave?
By far, probably him the best middle distance horse of this generation, and could be of all ages. It'd be interesting when he faces the Grey Gatsby again. Based on the weights, the Grey Gatsby would have been about 5 lengths ahead of him, given that he had to give £8 away and was only beaten 3.5 lengths. But Golden Horn is probably better value for winning distance as well, given he had to make his own pace in the race. He's rated highly. Whether he's deserving of being a 130 horse based on 3 runs this year, fair enough, all at the highest level, but he beat the same horses twice and then has beaten the older horses once on favourable terms. It's probably a bit early to be rating him that highly, but I wouldn't be going any higher than 130 even if he won the remainder of his races before he's sent off to the shed.
Chris, and saw in the Racing Post, it was either today or yesterday, they were comparing Golden Horn to the mighty Frankel and what they'd both achieved by the time they'd hit the racing at 130. Too much hype, overhype, not enough hype. What are you thinking, bud?
I think he's a proper horse, no doubt about it. I think he's a real high standard horse. I'm not sure about the ratings. I think the Racing Post and the Time Form people who do the ratings, I think they get carried away with themselves, to be honest. Frankel was a great horse in his own right. He, he destroyed the field in, one of the most breathtaking Guinness performances that anyone can ever remember. But, these are totally different horses. Golden Horn's much more of a middle distance horse. And, I think, if you look at his debut, I think he beat Storm the Stars, who he's gone on to beat since, and that horse has done the world of good, with his recent exploits. The win in the Dante where he beat Jack Hobbs, I thought that was a very good performance, and he followed it up with a fantastic effort in the Derby where, I think the 3.5 lengths flattered Jack Hobbs in that particular race. I think Frankie had much more under the tank than he let on. And his victory over the Grey Gatsby, elevates him into that superstar sort of category because the Grey Gatsby has some very solid form himself. He is a proper Grade 1 horse. And, despite the weight concession from the Grey Gatsby, I think Golden Horn will, I think even if they're off levels, I think Golden Horn would still probably beat the Grey Gatsby. So I think Golden Horn's a very good horse, high class Derby winner, and bad horses or average horses don't go on to win the Eclipse as well. So I think he's very, very high class.
Yeah, the horse has entered into 4 races, and it still holds those entries. We've got, in order of most recent, we've got the King George V and Queen Elizabeth Stakes at Ascot. We've got the Judmont at York, the Irish Champion Stakes at Leopardstown, and the Arc at Longchamp. let's say you have the enviable position of deciding where that horse goes, Dave. Which of those 4 would you be more favourable sending it to? Taking everything into consideration, not just the horse's chances of winning, the prestige of the race, etc. Where would you like to throw that horse?
I would go Arc. I would go International Arc. The Arc to me would be a no-brainer, given the weight allowances for 3-year-olds. And International is probably a nice stepping stone to give them a good prep to the Arc. You couldn't go Irish champion, then Arc.
The Arc, as well as I said, the Arc is such a tough one. You'd love to see it go and win it, but 1 mile 4, especially if it ends up with typical French weather.
Yeah, well, it won't be going to the Arc anyway. I think Gosling has pretty much said that Jack Hobbs would be his horse in the Arc, and Golden Horn won't be going. It'll probably just go to the International, and it depending on the ground, it might go to the Irish champion or the English champion, but it'll be all ground dependent. I don't think we're running on extremes. So you might only see the horse one more time and it'll be off.
And Chris, where would you be packing its bags and sending it off to?
It will go to the Arc. We know it's not going to go to the Arc. That's Gosling's already talked about Jack Hobbs going to that, and I think Jack Hobbs would be a huge player in that, more suited maybe even. I think you've got to look at the record of Golden Horn as well. Winning an Epsom Derby is not easy. It can take a lot out of a horse. Personally, I'd love to see it going the King George, but I think more likely is Judmont, and I think that will be the last time we see it.
Yeah, I certainly can. It certainly won't be running as a 4-year-old. Personally, I'd like to see it go to York for the Judmont. I think if it ends up absolutely obliterating everything in the Judgment, I just don't think especially if it's not going to the Arc, I don't see the point in sending it to Ireland. It's beaten the best of Ireland, pretty much.
Careful
the only... Pardon?
Careful now.
Well, alright, well, Weld had a horse in there that didn't take up his entry, but I can't see that would have...
You don't want to be going and getting the Derby winner beaten, Rory, do you?
Well, I can't... Nah, I couldn't see the Weld horse, no matter how good it is, beating Golden Horn. So, to be honest, I'd love to have seen it gone to the Arc, but if that's not the case, then I just think Judman and Shed Time, really. Undoubtedly is a fantastic horse. The owner, deserves it. It pumps an absolute ton of money into racing and deserves a big success. It's nice to see Frankie as well back after the, few years previously as well. Him not having the best, being in the best position, as it were. One question I'll ask you both, lads. In terms of, let's say, Derby runners in our lifetime, or that we've seen, how highly do you rate Golden Horn? Is it up there with City of the Stars? Does it beat the likes of City of the Stars? You've got, Camelot, etc. Dave?
Well, it's probably up there. Visually, it's one of the best derbies in the last 10 years. It's hard to really substantiate how good a derby it was. We know the first 3, the second, third and fourth have since come out and finished first, second and third in the Irish Derby. So the form has been well boosted, but it's still probably too early to say how good a derby it was. You probably look back this time next year, when a couple have trained on as 4-year-olds and have gone on to hopefully win a couple of Group 1s and whatever. But visually, it was a very impressive derby win. It's what a good horse, how a good horse should win a Group 1, going away at the line after a quick turn of foot, after travelling well through a race. So, if Steve Stars was a superstar and he went on to win the Arc, fair enough, we didn't see him again after that, but he won a Guineas beforehand as well. Whereas Golden Horn has won the Dante and the Eclipse now. So, while he has the potential, I think he needs to win impressively in his last race. And then hopefully next year the form will be substantiated and he'll be probably one of the best derby winners we've seen in the last 10 years.
Chris, I'll ask it you slightly differently. Where do you rank his Derby win compared to other Derby wins? Race for race, like for like. Better than See the Stars, better than Camelot, Galileo, High Chaparral.
I think it's very hard to start playing a generation game, to be honest with you. I agree with what most of Dave said. He was strong at the finish of the Derby, and that's what you want to see, and he was an impressive winner of the Derby. The form makes sense. It's been Frank since, so you can't say it was a soft Derby like a few of them have been in recent years. See the Stars was, it was different gravy. The horse only just did enough. He never overexerted himself. He was a great horse. He was proven, from a mile to a mile 4. So, we're talking different sort of horse there, but he's certainly one of the better horses of the last 10 years to win the Derby. And as a logical winner of the Derby, he ticks every single box. And, with Jacobs likely to train on next year, we could well be doing the Frankel thing with, well, look how many horses have come out of that Derby and won Grade 1s.
Yeah, I think another good thing, another sort of like more impressive thing, or makes the horse's achievement more impressive, is that not many people spoke about this horse anti-post. There was no big, well, this horse is, is going to go into the Derby. I mean, when it ended up going to the Dante, I think it was 3rd, maybe 4th favourite when it won its Derby trial. Obviously at that point we then saw, wow, it's really good. But there was no major outlets that were banging the drum for Golden Horn. However, may I add, the horse was in our 60 Horses to Follow book. If you bought a copy of that, you might have made yourself a few bob. Just an idea. But anyway. But I mean, does that make the horse more impressive? The fact that it wasn't an Aidan O'Brien awesome 2-year-old that everyone had high hopes for. The fact that it was a bit less unknown. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he took us a little bit by surprise because we had other ideas for the Derby, for John Gosden in particular. A lot of people fancied Jacobs, but, good horses, well-bred horses, trained by, great trainers like Gosden and Aidan O'Brien's. They're not in it to send horses for the day out. They know what they've got at home, and, maybe he's caught a few of us by surprise, but, he's proven himself, and he's just a very good horse.
Stay updated by hitting that like button on our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter @PixPaddock.
Introducing a new feature as well now. Don't know whether or not you've been on our site, if you're listeners, and you've seen our notebook horses. So horses to follow whereby, if any of us see something that's run really impressively and we want to follow it, whether or not we expect it to go in next time, etc., etc. And that's the place to do. What we're going to do, we're going to tie that in with our podcast, where every week the 3 of us will give a horse that's run within the last 7 days that we think is worth noting. Put it online as well, so you can double check, get it in your trackers, and hopefully win a few pennies going forward. I'll start with you, Dave. Anything over the last week or so?
Horse of Beverly in the 3 o'clock, Bondi Beach Boy. Only finished 8th of 16, but was drawn in the car park in stall 16. Is now down below his last winning mark, and usually runs up a sequence between August and September, up around Beverly, Ripon, Pontefract, all over 5 furlongs and good fast ground, and he'll be winning soon.
Trainer Dave?
Turner. Jim Turner.
So that's Bondi Beach Boy. And in terms of betting, what would you be advising our listeners? Follow it just the next time it runs, the next couple of the times it runs.
Follow it on fast ground over 5 furlongs for the rest of the season.
Sweet. Chris?
Yeah, one I gave on Saturday in my article was Lady Tiana, who won on soft ground. She's more than capable with cutting the ground over around 12 furlongs. I could say her, she definitely wants watching on soft ground or with cutting the ground, but she may be going, in a Group 1 next time, so I wouldn't be interested in a Group 1. But a horse in that race who finished behind her and has done a couple of times before is Jordan Princess. She's been a bit slow to come to hand this year. She's got a little bit to find with the likes of Lady Tiana and Miss Marjorie, but she's a nice type, and she looks like she was coming to hand last time. I think Connections will be able to pick a race that a 10, 12 furlong race for her. Probably on good ground, and I would back her until she went in. I don't think she wants extreme ground, but I think good and good soft is good enough, and I think she'll go in for Luca Kamani somewhere.
Jordan Princess. For what it's worth, that was my horse also run on Saturday. It came second in the distaff at Sandown Saturday just gone. Was backed heavily on Saturday, and was, I think Chris advised, was probably one of the biggest backed horses of the day that day. Was a tad unlucky in taking nothing away from the winner, but it was a tad unlucky that it didn't win. And I think Connections will be wanting a win out of it sooner rather than later now. I think now that people all have the eye on that horse for doing something, I can't see it being a fantastic price, but I'd back it the next time out. I wouldn't follow it religiously. I think once it goes in, and it would probably have to go in within the next one or two races, then, leave it well alone then. But yeah, I think in the next two times, unless it wins first time. And Sir Brian Meehan's Montalcino.
Visit picksfromthepaddock.co.uk. All you need for racing.
Final thing, lads. Obviously, we'll try and pick a winner for this Saturday. I know it's 3 or 4 days ahead now. But the big race on Saturday is the July Cup. It's the 6 furlong race at Newmarket. I'll come to you first, Dave. Obviously, we've got Brazen Bow and we've got Mahara, the two way ahead in the betting. Worthy favourites?
You'd have to say Mahara is, after his demolition job in the Commonwealth Cup, beating some good sprinters by 4 lengths, and a couple of them reopposed again today. Brazen Bow's price is probably down to the fact that it's over from Australia. It stayed over from the July Cup when Connections probably felt they left the race behind at Royal Ascot, racing solely on their own on the rail with the whole other field in another group. But I couldn't be having him at that price. He's probably vulnerable, as he'll be making the pace to the likes of Mahara coming off the pace. The one for me is Anthem Alexander. I'm not sure if Pat Smullen is going over for the ride, but I'd imagine he will be, which is only a positive. He's riding out of skin at the moment. Eddie Lyons' yard have hit form recently, and he won this last year with Slade Power. 3-year-old filly getting the allowances, so she will be good enough for me at around the 14-1 mark.
Chris, I know you're not a fan of Brazen Bow. Do you think it deserves a price of 5-2? I know Dave said that it's probably a bit of a hangover in the sense that it probably should have done or gotten a lot closer at Ascot. And the fact that the horse has just stayed over here for this race. I know you're not a fan. Why is that one not winning?
I just don't like this track for Brazen Bow. I weren't overly impressed with the ride Craig Williams gave the horse at Royal Ascot. I think an English jockey would have most certainly won on it. It only lost by half a length, having raced all alone, to be honest with you. And I was a little bit disappointed with the ride, and I think this is an afterthought. I just think the track as well is totally different. It's an undulating track, Newmarket, and whether it'll handle the dip is. I just can't see it. It'll not be used to anything like this, and I think it'll set it up for a closer. I think Mahara makes more sense of the two if you're going to go in with one of the short ones, but I think at the prices, I think fewer ground dependent as well. So, if it rained, Jack Dester would become very interesting at around 33-1. Soul Power's a big price if he turns up, but he'd want fast ground. He could run into a place at the odds, but G-Force would be for me. I think this is probably his ideal trip, and if he's recovered from a mishap earlier in the season, I think 16-1 for a horse that runs from off the pace, I think he could run into a place.
So Anthem Alexander and G-Force. Personally, without sounding cruel, and there's some absolutely lovely horses in the race. I just think it's an horrible race to try and decipher. I think Muthmay probably has a chance. I think Tropics with course and distance form has a chance. If I was being very sentimental, I'd stick with Lancelot Delac, but this is a far too big a step up in class. If Due Diligence showed anything of its form as a 3-year-old, then it would have a cracking chance, but that seems to have gone backwards. I'm a G-Force fan as well. Soul Power, but unfortunately it's 6 furlongs. So I'm going to stick with those that seem to have served me well. I'll advise people this is with no massive deal of confidence. But Matt Moo, if the ground stays good to firm. Despite the fact, obviously, it's won on soft before, I don't think it's desperate for too much in the way of mudslinging. So I'm going to go Matt Moo each way if it's a decent price of, say, 10-1 or bigger, but with no massive or great amount of confidence. And those are the 3 that we've given for the big race this Saturday. Away from the big race, chaps, is there anything else either of you like or want to throw in the hat for a different race at all, Chris?
Yeah, I quite like Bronze Angel in the Bunbury Cup. He was a prolific horse last year and he shot up the ratings. I think the last twice he has threatened at returning to form. He ran a nice race behind Speculative Bid. He was only beaten 4 lengths. He was running on well at the end. And he showed up for a long way at Royal Ascot behind GM Hopkins. He was only beaten 4 lengths there. I think his turn's not far away now. He's come down the weights a little bit. He'll act on this track. We know this already. So I think he's a big player at 16-1 coming down the weights. And, he's got a great shot.
Dave?
The horse I'm going to put up is First Flight in the 325 at York, the John Smith's Cup. Ran well behind Masoub, who runs in a Group 2 on Thursday. Was only 3/4 of a length behind over the course and distance on a second to last run, and got no run at all at Royal Ascot in the Wolverton Handicap, but still stayed on after getting badly hampered to finish 2 lengths behind that same horse. He was well back that day into 5-1 second favourite, and probably should be winning this race for Godolphin. So First Flight in the 325 at York.
Yeah, sticking with York, I'm going to go for an earlier race. Also on Saturday, a horse that, when it comes to racing on a Yorkshire-based track, has what can only be described as mortifying luck. Qatar Glory, we all know, should have won at Doncaster back in September last year. It obviously hasn't been seen this season, so a big gamble was taken on this, and I would probably advise, if it's anything less than 8-1 or 7-1, probably not to really touch it. But I think from a horse that should be a Group 2 winner, is a Group 3 winner, to now be in a listed race, yes, he's making his reappearance, but I think that horse has a touch of class, out of Exceed and Excel. Yeah, I think Qatar Glory for Charles Hills could be a bit of a forgotten horse if it's priced up accordingly. So yeah, that's in the big race. Obviously gave you their 3, but away from that, we've got Chris has gone for Bronze Angel in the Bunbury Cup. Dave's gone for First Flight in the 325 at York on Saturday, and I've gone for Qatar Glory at York. Obviously, if you want to give your selections, your picks, any of your thoughts as to what we've said on the show, make sure you follow us at Picks Paddock on Twitter. You can like us on Facebook. If you've got any questions or anything you want to ask us either, you can also jump onto www.picksfromthepaddock.co.uk, go to podcast, and there's a little section at the bottom that says email the show. Be happy to read out your tips, your questions, and get stuck into them. Obviously, it's been an absolute age since we've done one, and we'll endeavour to do them more regularly going forward. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned.